Part 2: Choices and Second Chances. Happy birthday! Wes gave me a half smile. Thanks, man. I almost totally forgot. As the rest of the country celebrated independence, Wes spent his 32nd birthday in prison. He's allowed to have visitors only on odd days of the year, so he was prohibited from seeing people on the 4th of July. I visited a couple of days after his actual birthday. When I arrived at Jessup that morning, my eyes flickered up to the sign mounted above the institution's steel front doors. The name of the prison, Jessup Correctional Institution, inked in bloody crimson. I stopped walking for a moment and stood in silence. It was midday. Over the towers of the prison, the summer sun was high in the center of a cloudless sky. I looked up at the vast canopy of the blue above, then took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air race through me. For the first time in a long time, I was reminded of the daily miracle of my freedom, the ability to move, explore, meet new people, or simply enjoy the sun beating down on my face. After going through the requisite security checks, I waited for Wes to walk into the waiting area. I studied the reunions taking place around me. One inmate, a young man seemingly in his early 20s, sat across from a woman with a baby squirming in her arms. He was apparently meeting his own child for the first time. His girlfriend complained that since the kid hadn't slept through the whole night since he was born, neither had she. Another inmate listened wide eyed as his grandmother ran down a list of his friends from the neighborhood, updating him on what they'd been up to since he'd gone away. He hung on her every word. When my conversation with Wes had begun years earlier, we'd said only what we thought the other wanted to hear, what the other needed to hear. But over time, it was hard to keep up the act, and our conversations drifted toward an almost therapeutic honesty. When did you feel like you'd become a man? Wes asked me, a troubled look on his face. Hmm. I think it was when I first felt accountable to people other than myself. When I first cared that my actions mattered to people other than just me. I answered quickly and confidently, but I wasn't too sure of what I was talking about. When did I actually become a man? There was no official ceremony that brought my childhood to an end. Instead, crisis or other circumstances presented me with adult sized responsibilities and obligations that I had to meet one way or another. For some boys, this happens later, in their late teens or even 20s, allowing them to grow organically into adulthood. But for some of us, the promotion to adulthood, or at least its challenges, is so jarring, so sudden, that we enter it unprepared and might be undone by it. Wes, feeding off my answer, attempted to finish my thought. Providing for others isn't easy, and the mistakes you make trying are pretty unforgiving. He paused. I waited. He rubbed his chin, softly pulling at the long strands of his goatee with his fingers. And second chances are pretty fleeting. What do you mean? From everything you told me, both of us did some pretty wrong stuff when we were younger, and both of us had second chances. But if the situation or the context where you make the decisions don't change, then second chances don't mean too much, huh? Wes and I stared at each other for a moment, surrounded by the evidence that some kids were forced to become adults prematurely. These incarcerated men, before they'd even reached a point of basic maturity, had flagrantly and tragically squandered the few opportunities they would have to contribute productively to something greater than themselves. I sat back, allowing Wes's words to sink in. Then I responded, I guess it's hard sometimes to distinguish between second chances and last chances.